The call came on a Tuesday, slicing through the curated tranquility of our Milanese villa like a shard of broken glass. I remember the light that day, a perfect golden Italian light that gilded the cypress trees and made the terracotta roofs glow. My father, Alistair, was on the veranda, a phone pressed to his ear, his laughter, a sound usually rich with the warmth of expensive wine and newfound importance, dying in his throat. The color drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask. He didn't speak. He simply listened, his knuckles whitening around the phone. Then, with a slow, deliberate finality, he ended the call and placed the phone on the glass table. The click was the sound of a vault door sealing shut. He turned to my mother, his eyes wide with a strange cold fire. "It's the old man," he whispered, though there was no one else to hear. "In Singapore. A massive stroke. The doctors say it's a matter of days, hours even." My mother, Serafina, a woman whose beauty was a carefully maintained fortress, put a hand to her throat. "We must go, Alistair. We must be there." A slow, cruel smile spread across my father's face. It was a smile I had never seen before, a thing of sharp edges and frozen calculation. Go? Why would we go? He's on the other side of the world. The logistics alone, and the press. It would be a circus. I was 17, standing in the doorway, a book forgotten in my hand. I felt the world tilt. My grandfather, Lysander Blackwood, was a titan. To me, he was not the ruthless billionaire of business magazines. He was the man with a laugh like rolling thunder who taught me to play chess, whose vast, silent library was my sanctuary. He smelled of old books and clean, cold air. He was the only anchor in the gilded, rootless existence my father had built for us, hopping from one European capital to another, spending the vast allowance Lysander provided with a desperate, showy extravagance. "But he's your father," I said, my voice small and thin in the heavy air. Alistair's gaze snapped to me, the smile vanishing. "He is a man who has controlled every breath I've ever taken. A man who never saw me as anything more than a disappointing heir. A man who would have left everything to that damned foundation, to a bunch of strangers, before he'd trust me with his legacy." He walked to the edge of the veranda, looking out over the manicured gardens that Lysander's money paid for. "No, we will not go. We will wait, and when the news comes, we will return to New York, as the grieving son, as the rightful heir." The silence that followed was more deafening than any argument. My mother, after a long moment, gave a slow, resigned nod. She had chosen her side long ago. I felt a chasm open at my feet, a moral abyss so vast it stole my breath. They were leaving him to die alone. In a sterile hospital room halfway across the globe, the great Lysander Blackwood would draw his last breath believing his only son could not be bothered to come. The next 48 hours were a waking nightmare. We did not pack. We did not mourn. My father paced, his phone constantly in his hand, receiving updates from a private source, his mood swinging between grim satisfaction and frantic anxiety. He was not grieving. He was waiting for a coronation. I locked myself in my room, the image of my grandfather, frail and alone, haunting me. I thought of his hands, gnarled and strong, moving chess pieces with decisive certainty. I thought of the stories he told of building his empire from nothing, of the unyielding integrity he preached. And I thought of my father, here in the sun, already counting the money. When the final call came, Alistair took it in his study. He emerged minutes later, his face a perfect, practiced mask of sorrow. He looked at us, his voice heavy with a lie so profound it seemed to stain the very air. "He's gone." He let a single, calculated tear trace a path down his cheek. Start packing. We're going home. Home. The word was the obscenity. We were not going home. We were going to claim a prize. As I numbly folded clothes into a suitcase, I felt something break inside me, something fundamental. The love I had for my father curdled in that moment, turning into a hard, cold stone of disgust. He had left his father to die. He had committed the ultimate betrayal, not for survival, but for greed. And as the private jet carried us back across the Atlantic, I stared out at the clouds, the weight of my grandfather's memory a heavy cloak on my shoulders. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that my father's sin was a debt that would be called. Karma was not a concept, it was a force, and I felt it stirring, waiting for our arrival. If you believe revenge isn't evil, it is the voice of justice rising from pain. Like, comment, share, and subscribe to Silent Revenge. New York was a city in mourning, or at least the financial district was. The death of Lysander Blackwood was front-page news, his grim, determined face staring out from every newspaper stand. The narrative was already being woven. The titan of industry, the self-made billionaire, dead abroad, survived by his devoted son. My father played his part to perfection. At the airport, he was photographed, haggard and stoic, shielding my mother from the flashbulbs. He was the picture of filial grief. The Blackwood penthouse, high above the noise of the city, felt like a tomb. It was filled with the ghost of my grandfather, his favorite wingback chair by the fire, his collection of antique navigational instruments, the lingering scent of his pipe tobacco. It was a sacred space, and my father's presence in it felt like a violation. He moved through the rooms, not with reverence, but with the appraising eye of a new king, already planning his renovations. The reading of the will was to be held in the library, the very room where Lysander had taught me the Sicilian defense. The air was thick with tension and the smell of old leather and lawyering. My father sat, poised and confident, his hand resting on my mother's. I sat apart from them, a traitor in their midst. The lawyer, an ancient, desiccated man named Mr. Sterling who had served my grandfather for half a century, began to read. The language was dense and legalistic. There were bequests to long-serving employees, generous donations to the foundation my father so despised. My father shifted impatiently, waiting for the main event. Then Mr. Sterling's voice, dry as dust, changed. It gained a faint, almost imperceptible note of steel. And to my son, Alistair. My father leaned forward, a hungry light in his eyes. I bequeath the sum of $1. The silence in the room was absolute, profound, a physical weight. I saw the words hit my father like a physical blow. He recoiled, his face a comical mask of disbelief. "What?" he breathed. A dollar. This is a joke, a mistake." Mr. Sterling did not look up. "There is a stipulation, Mr. Blackwood. A video recording, made by your father 1 week before his death, to be played at this time." He gestured to a screen on the wall. The screen flickered to life. And there he was. Lysander. He looked older, frailer, but his eyes, those piercing, intelligent eyes, burned with the same fierce intensity. He was sitting in this very library. "Alistair." His voice was a low rumble, stripped of all affection. "If you are hearing this, then you have received your inheritance. $1. The value I place on the character you have shown." He paused, letting the words hang in the air like a verdict. I know you did not come to Singapore. I know you were in Milan, waiting for me to die. A source close to you kept me informed of your celebrations." My father made a strangled sound. He had been betrayed from within his own camp. "You believed my empire was your birthright," Lysander continued, his gaze seeming to pierce through the screen and directly into my father's soul. "You were wrong. An empire built on sacrifice and principle cannot be inherited by a man who has neither. You are a hollow man, Alistair, a man who would leave his own father to die alone for a fortune. You are disinherited. From my company, from my fortune, from my name. Everything, the trusts, the shell companies, the liquid assets, the controlling shares of Blackwood Global, everything transitions irrevocably to my granddaughter, Ilara." The world stopped. My father's head swiveled toward me. His eyes were wide with a pure, undiluted horror. The hatred in them was a physical force. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes darting between my father and me, realizing in an instant that her gilded cage had just been handed to the canary. I could not breathe. I could not think. I stared at the screen, at my grandfather's face. "Ilara," he said, and his voice softened, "just for me. You have your mother's eyes, but you have my heart. You are the only true thing I leave behind. The empire is yours. Do not be the king he would have been. Be the queen you are." The screen went black. The stone of disgust I had carried since Milan transformed in that instant. It became a cornerstone. My father was on his feet, screaming, a torrent of rage and denial, pointing a shaking finger at me. You did this. You turned him against me." But I wasn't looking at him. I was looking at Mr. Sterling, who gave me a small, solemn nod. I was the billionaire. I was the heir. My father was left with nothing but the clothes on his back and the crushing weight of his own monstrous choice. Karma had not just been waiting. It had been meticulously planned by a master strategist, and it had just delivered checkmate. The aftermath was a silent, brutal war. My father's screams in the library gave way to a cold, seething war of attrition fought through lawyers and leaked stories to the press. He contested the will, of course. He claimed undue influence, a senile old man manipulated by a clever granddaughter. He painted me as a conniving, ungrateful child who had poisoned my grandfather's mind against his own son. But my grandfather, in his brilliant, posthumous strategy, had been airtight. The will was unassailable. The source of his information, a loyal aide my father had foolishly confided in, was prepared to testify. The $1 bequest was a global headline, a public shaming that stripped my father of his dignity far more effectively than any legal defeat. We were evicted from the penthouse. It was mine now, but I couldn't bear to live there, surrounded by the ghost of the man they had betrayed. I moved into a sleek, secure apartment, a fortress of my new reality. My father and mother were forced into a rented apartment, a humiliating step down from the palaces they were accustomed to. The allowance was cut off. The credit lines were frozen. The golden faucet had been wrenched from the wall. My father tried to rally his old contacts, the sycophants and hangers-on who had flocked to him when he was the heir apparent. They vanished like mist in the sun. No one backs a king without a crown. He was a pariah, a cautionary tale whispered about in boardrooms and country clubs. The man who had been too greedy to say goodbye to his dying father. I saw him once during that time. I was leaving a meeting with the board of Blackwood Global, my board now, and he was waiting for me in the lobby of the Blackwood Tower. He looked shrunken, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a desperate, feral need. "Ilara," he said, his voice a rasp. "You have to see reason. This is madness. You're a child. You can't run this company. Give me control. Let me be CEO. You can keep the title, the money, just give me the company. It's my birthright." I looked at him, this man who was my father, and I felt nothing but a vast, icy stillness. "Your birthright was a relationship with your father," I said, my voice calm, echoing in the marble hall. "You threw it away for a fantasy of an empire. Now you have neither." The hatred returned to his eyes, but it was mingled with a terrifying despair. "He turned you against me. He poisoned you." "No, father," I replied, turning to leave. "You did that all by yourself. I immersed myself in my grandfather's world. I spent days and nights in the corporate headquarters, learning the business from the ground up. I surrounded myself with the people Lysander had trusted, old lions who saw his spirit in my eyes and my relentless work ethic. I was not playing at being a CEO. I was becoming one. The grief for my grandfather was a constant ache, but I channeled it into purpose. Every decision I made, every strategy I approved, was a tribute to him. I was building my own legacy, not on his, but because of his belief in me. Meanwhile, my father's world continued to crumble. The lawsuits drained what little money he had left. My mother, unable to cope with the scandal, and the poverty, left him. The papers chronicled it all with gleeful schadenfreude. The mighty had fallen, and the public watched, mesmerized by the spectacle of a billionaire's son getting his cosmic comeuppance. I had won. I had the money, the power, the company. But the crown felt heavy, woven with thorns of betrayal and loss. This wasn't the happy ending of a fairy tale. It was the grim, satisfying conclusion of a moral equation. My father had been left with nothing, because he was, at his core, nothing. And I had been given everything because my grandfather had seen in me the one thing money could never buy: a soul. A year to the day after my grandfather's death, I stood at the window of my new office, looking down at the city he had helped to shape. Blackwood Global was not just stable, it was thriving. I had instituted his long-planned ethical initiatives, divested from questionable holdings, and focused the company's vast resources on the future-facing technologies he had always championed. The board, once skeptical, now looked at me with respect. I had earned my place. Mr. Sterling called me. "Ilara," he said, his dry voice now holding a note of warmth. "There's a matter to conclude. The final asset." "I thought everything was transferred," I said, puzzled. "This is a personal asset. A box. Your grandfather left specific instructions for it to be delivered to you on this date. The box was brought to my office later that afternoon. It was made of dark, polished wood, simple and unadorned. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was the chess set from his library. The pieces, carved from ivory and ebony, were cool to the touch. Beneath the board was a sealed envelope with my name written in his strong, slanting hand. I opened it with trembling fingers. "My dearest Ilara, if you are reading this, you have weathered the storm. You have faced the tempest of your father Aegeus' wrath and proven yourself the master of your own destiny, and mine. I am so immensely proud of the woman you have become. I knew what Alistair was. A man consumed by the reflection of wealth, never understanding its substance. I knew he would not come to my bedside. I knew the revelation of my true will would break him. But my goal was never to break him, Ilara. It was to protect you, and the legacy I built, from the rot of his character. I could not save my son, but I could save you from him. This chess set is my final lesson to you. Life, like this game, is about foresight, sacrifice, and the unwavering commitment to a principle. I sacrificed my relationship with my son long before he left me to die, because I would not let his weakness corrupt what I had built for you. I made my move long before he ever knew the game was afoot. Do not mourn for him. His fate was of his own choosing. Live brilliantly, rule wisely, love deeply, and remember, the most powerful moves are often the quietest, made long before the checkmate is ever seen. With all my love, Lysander. I ran my fingers over the king piece, my vision blurring with tears. He had not been a cold, calculating titan in his final act. He had been a grandfather, a protector, a master player who had secured my future with his last, masterful move. I had one final piece of business. I instructed my lawyer to draw up a document. It was not a reconciliation. It was a balance sheet. I created a trust for my father. It would provide him with a small, steady monthly income, enough to live on, but not enough for extravagance. It was not given out of love or forgiveness. It was given as a final statement of power, a demonstration that I held the purse strings to his very existence, just as he had believed my grandfather did. It was the ultimate, silent rebuke. The news reached me that he had accepted it. There was no thank you. There was no acknowledgement. There was only the silent, humiliating receipt of the funds, a monthly reminder that his daughter, the child he had underestimated, was now his keeper. Karma had not been a random bolt from the blue. It had been my grandfather, a man of immense will, sculpting justice from beyond the grave. My father had left his billionaire father to die abroad, believing he was stepping into a kingdom. But when he came home, he found that the kingdom had a new, unexpected queen, and her reign was built on the very principles he had so carelessly discarded. The debt had been paid in full. If this story made your heart race or your eyes tear up with justice, don't forget to support this video and keep the voice of silent revenge alive. Comment "Justice wins" if you believe no wound should stay unanswered.